The borrowed harness hanging from his fist had never been hers to lend, and Rose Norwood knew it the instant she saw Fletcher Xander standing at her gate in the wheat-gold light of an early June morning. She paused on the porch, wiping flour from her hands onto her apron, and studied him across the yard. He was a tall man, sun-darkened and lean as a fence post, with the kind of quiet that came from working alone with animals most of his life. 31 years old, unmarried, and known throughout Umatilla County as the best horse breaker within 50 miles. Men brought him their wild-eyed colts and spooked mares, and he gentled them with patience that seemed infinite. With people, though, he had roughly 6 words a day, and those came hard. "Morning," he said, not quite meeting her eyes. "Thought I would bring this back." Rose descended the steps slowly. She was 27, slender and fair-haired, with a dusting of freckles across her nose that made her look younger than her years. The black morning dress she had worn all winter was packed away now, replaced by a faded calico work dress that had seen better days. Her late husband Thomas had been dead 4 months, taken by pneumonia in February when the snow lay 3 feet deep and the doctor could not get through from Pendleton. "I never lent you any harness, Mr. Xander," she said quietly. "No." He frowned at the leather straps as though they had betrayed him. "Must have got confused. Sorry to bother you." He turned to go, and Rose felt something stir in her chest, something she had not felt since Thomas took sick. Not attraction exactly, not yet, but a recognition of kindness clumsily offered. The neighbors had brought casseroles and condolences in February, then drifted away as spring came on. This man, whom she barely knew beyond a nod at church, had just invented an excuse to check on her. "Mr. Xander," she called. He stopped. "Since you have come all this way, would you care for coffee?" He turned back, surprise crossing his weathered face. "That would be welcome, madam. Thank you." She led him into the kitchen, acutely aware of the disarray. Bread dough rising on the counter, a basket of mending by the stove, her late husband's coat still hanging on its peg by the door because she could not bring herself to pack it away. Fletcher removed his hat and stood awkwardly near the table until she gestured for him to sit. The coffee was still hot from breakfast. She poured 2 cups and sat across from him, folding her hands around the warm ceramic. For a long moment neither spoke. "How are you managing?" he asked finally. The question, simple and direct, nearly undid her. Rose looked down at her coffee. "Well enough. The wheat is coming in. I have been doing the plowing myself." "I heard about your team." His voice was carefully neutral. Rose's jaw tightened. Yes, everyone had heard about her team. The big, gentle Procuran named Atlas that Thomas had bought 2 years ago, and the wall-eyed roan gelding called Samson that she had acquired in desperation from a traveling horse trader who had sworn the animal was sound and steady. The trader had lied. Samson spooked at shadows, pulled sideways instead of straight, and fought Atlas at every turn. Plowing with them was like trying to steer a ship with 2 rudders pointed in opposite directions. She had heard the laughter from the men loitering at the feed store in town, seen the pitying head shakes from neighboring farmers. "They get the work done," she said, a bit defensively. Fletcher nodded slowly. "Saw your furrows when I rode past last week. Straighter than most." It was the first kind word anyone had said about her farming in months. Rose felt heat rise in her face. "Thank you." "Your husband's brother," Fletcher said, staring into his coffee. "He's still coming around." Rose's hands tightened on her cup. "Yes." That was all she trusted herself to say. Vernon Norwood, Thomas's older brother, had appeared 3 weeks after the funeral with papers and proposals. "Sell the farm to him," he said. She could not work it alone, not properly, and wheat prices were uncertain. He would give her a fair price, he claimed, though the figure he named was half what the land was worth. When she refused, his visits became more frequent, his arguments more pressing. Just yesterday he had sat in this very kitchen and told her she was being foolish, that a woman alone could not manage a wheat operation, that she should take his offer before something happened and she lost everything. Fletcher drained his coffee and stood. "I should let you get back to your work." Rose walked him to the door. On the threshold he paused, turning his hat in his hands. "If you ever need anything, Mrs. Norwood, my place is just over the rise, 2 miles east." "I know where it is," she said softly. "Thank you, Mr. Xander." He nodded and walked back to his horse, a compact bay mare tied at the gate. Rose watched him ride away, dust rising from the hooves, and wondered if she had just experienced what her mother would have called a kindness call. The thought made her feel strange, guilty and hopeful all at once. It was too soon, surely. Thomas had been dead only 4 months, but Fletcher Xander came back. 3 days later he appeared at sunrise with a section of fence rail, claiming he had found it on the road and thought it might belong to her property. 5 days after that, he brought a jar of honey, saying his neighbor's bees had swarmed and there was extra. Each time Rose knew the excuse was transparent, and each time she invited him in for coffee. They spoke little. Fletcher was not a man built for conversation. But his presence was steady and undemanding, and Rose found herself listening for the sound of hoofbeats on the road. The 11th week after Thomas's death, Fletcher rode up on a Thursday morning to find Rose in the barn, struggling with the mismatched team. She had been trying to harness them for an hour, and Samson, the roan, had already stepped on her foot and shied away from the collar 3 times. Atlas stood patient and resigned, but Samson rolled his wall eye and snorted at every movement. Fletcher appeared in the barn doorway, silent as a cat. "Need a hand?" Rose pushed hair out of her face, sweating despite the cool morning. "I can manage." "Yes, madam." He did not move. Samson shied again, and the heavy collar swung from Rose's hands, nearly clipping her shoulder. She bit back a curse. Fletcher stepped forward. "May I?" Rose stepped back, defeated. "Please." She watched as he approached Samson with a quietness that was almost eerie. No sudden movements, no sharp words. He let the horse sniff his hands, then slid the collar into place with a smoothness that made it look easy. Within minutes both horses were in harness, standing calm. "How do you do that?" Rose asked. "Just got to let them know you are not afraid and you are not angry. They feel everything." Rose looked at the team, then at Fletcher. An idea was forming, reckless and desperate. "Mr. Xander, do you know about the county fair in August?" "Yes, madam." "There is a pulling contest for teams. The winner gets a ribbon and a contract for freighting and plowing with the grain warehouse. 6 months of guaranteed work at good wages." Fletcher nodded slowly. "I have heard of it." Rose took a breath. "Vernon, my brother-in-law, is pressing me hard to sell. He says I cannot make the farm pay, but if I had that contract I could hold on. I could prove the place is viable." She gestured helplessly at the team. "But not with them. Not like this." Fletcher studied the horses. "When is the contest?" "August 23rd, 10 weeks from now." "That is not much time." "I know." Rose met his eyes. "I know it is too much to ask. You have your own work, but I do not know who else to turn to." For a long moment Fletcher said nothing. Then he walked over to Samson and ran a hand down the roan's neck. The horse shivered but did not pull away. "I could come mornings," he said. "Work with them before the day gets hot. No promises, but I could try." Relief flooded through Rose so intensely she felt dizzy. "I would pay you." "No need. Mr. Xander, I cannot ask you to work for nothing." He turned to face her, and for the first time she saw something flicker in his eyes, something she could not quite name. "I am not doing it for nothing, Mrs. Norwood." The words hung in the air between them. Rose felt her heart begin to hammer. "I will see you tomorrow morning." Fletcher said quietly, and left. True to his word, he returned at dawn the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that. Rose would wake in the gray pre-sunrise light to the sound of his horse in the yard, and by the time she had coffee made he would have the team out and working. She watched from the kitchen window as he walked them in circles, backed them, started and stopped them, his voice a low steady murmur she could not make out. Samson fought him the first week, rearing and balking, but Fletcher never raised his voice or his hand. He simply waited, quiet and patient, until the horse settled. By the second week, Samson was walking in harness without shying. By the third week, he was pulling in tandem with Atlas, the furrows almost straight. Rose brought coffee out to the field one morning and found Fletcher wiping sweat from his face, the team standing calm behind him. "They are learning," she said. "They are trying." Rose handed him the coffee. Their fingers brushed, and she pulled back too quickly. Fletcher noticed but said nothing. "How is Vernon?" he asked, persistent. She sighed. "He came by Tuesday, said I was being stubborn and foolish, that I should sell before I embarrass myself at the fair." Fletcher's jaw tightened. "You are not foolish. He thinks I am. He is wrong." The simplicity of it, the absolute certainty in Fletcher's voice made Rose want to cry. She turned away, blinking hard. "I should let you get back to work." "Rose," he said, and it was the first time he had used her given name. She froze. "You are doing good work here. Do not let him tell you otherwise." She nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and walked back to the house. The days settled into a rhythm. Fletcher arrived at dawn, worked the team until mid-morning, then left to attend to his own business. Sometimes he stayed for breakfast, sitting quiet at her table while Rose cooked eggs and bacon. They spoke sparingly, but the silence between them was comfortable, companionable. Rose found herself watching him when he did not notice, the capable movements of his hands, the way he gentled the horses with a touch. She had not felt this way since she was a girl, and the realization frightened her. Thomas had been a good man, steady and kind. Their marriage had been built on affection and mutual respect, and she had mourned him deeply. But what she felt stirring now, watching Fletcher in her barn, was something different, sharper, more intense. It felt like a betrayal of Thomas's memory, and yet she could not stop it. July arrived hot and dry. The wheat ripened in waves of gold, and Rose hired day laborers to help with the harvest. Fletcher continued coming in the mornings, and the team improved daily. Samson no longer shied at shadows, and his pulling was steady and strong. Atlas seemed relieved to have a competent partner. They were becoming a true team. Then, 6 weeks before the fair, disaster struck. Rose was in the house when she heard Fletcher shout. She ran to the barn and found him kneeling beside Samson, the roan lying on his side in the dirt. The horse's breathing was labored, and his left front leg was held at an odd angle. "What happened?" Rose gasped, stepped in a gopher hole. "Leg is badly strained, maybe worse." Fletcher's face was grim. "I am sorry, Rose, I should have seen it. It is not your fault." Rose knelt beside the horse, her mind racing. Will he recover? Maybe, with rest, but not in 6 weeks, not in time for the fair. Rose sank back on her heels. The pulling contest required a matched team, 2 horses of similar size and capability. Without Samson, she had nothing. Vernon would win by default. She would have to sell. Fletcher stood and walked to the barn door, staring out at the morning. Rose watched his shoulders tense, saw his hands curl into fists. "There might be a way," he said slowly. "What do you mean?" He turned. "I have 3 horses, saddle stock. If I sold them, I could buy you a second Percheron, match Atlas properly." Rose stood, shaking her head. "No, absolutely not. Those horses are your livelihood. I can get more horses." "Fletcher, no, I cannot let you do that." He crossed the space between them in 3 strides. Rose, listen to me. If you lose this place, where will you go? What will you do? I will figure something out. Will you marry Vernon? Is that his plan? The question struck her like a slap. What? No, never. Then what? Fletcher's voice was rough with emotion she had never heard from him before. You will go live with family. Hire yourself out as a seamstress. You belong here on this land, and I will not stand by and watch Vernon take it from you. Rose stared at him. Why do you care so much? The question hung between them. Fletcher's throat worked, and for a moment she thought he would not answer. Because I have been in love with you since the day I saw you at church 3 years ago, he said hoarsely. Because I have been inventing reasons to see you for 11 weeks, and I cannot invent them anymore. Because if I can do one thing to help you keep what is yours, I will sell every horse I own and count it well spent. Rose could not breathe. The barn seemed to tilt around her. You barely know me, she whispered. I know enough. I know you are strong and stubborn and good. I know you loved your husband and mourned him proper. I know you deserve better than to be bullied off your own land. He took a shaky breath. I know I have no right to say any of this. You are in mourning, and I am nothing but a horse breaker with more skill with animals than people. But I will not lie to you, Rose. Not any more. She should tell him to go. She should say it was too soon, that she needed time, that his declaration was inappropriate. But when she opened her mouth, what came out was, sell the horses. Fletcher's eyes widened. Rose, sell them by the Procurin. We have 6 weeks. You can train a new team in 6 weeks. I have seen what you can do. She stepped closer. But I want you to know, Fletcher Xander, that when this is over, win or lose, I am going to ask you to call on me, properly. In my parlor, and we are going to see where this goes. A smile broke across Fletcher's face, the first real smile she had ever seen from him. It transformed him, made him almost boyish. Yes, madam, he said. I would like that very much. The next week was a blur. Fletcher sold his 3 saddle horses to a rancher near Pendleton for a fair price, then used the money to buy a young Procurin gelding from a farmer in Walla Walla. The horse was big and strong, only 4 years old, with a gentle disposition and good conformation. Fletcher named him Goliath and immediately began working him with Atlas. Training 2 Procurins was different than training the mismatched pair. The horses were similar in temperament and size, and they learned to move together naturally. But Goliath was young and green, unused to heavy pulling, and he tired easily. Fletcher worked with him patiently, building his strength and stamina day by day. Rose watched the progress with a mixture of hope and anxiety. August arrived, bringing heat that shimmered off the wheat fields. The team improved steadily. Goliath learned to lean into the harness, to pull in rhythm with Atlas. Fletcher hitched them to increasingly heavy loads, preparing them for the contest. Vernon came calling again in early August. He found Rose in the kitchen preserving beans and invited himself in without knocking. I heard you bought a new horse, he said without preamble. I did. Waste of money. You still planning on entering the pulling contest? I am. Vernon laughed, a sound without humor. Rose, be reasonable. You have never done a contest like that. You do not know how to handle a team under pressure. You will embarrass yourself, and then where will you be? Rose set down her canning knife and faced him squarely. I will be right here, Vernon, on my land, running my farm. This is not your farm, it was Thomas's farm. And Thomas left it to me, in his will, which you witnessed. Vernon's face darkened. He did not expect you to try to run it alone. He thought you would remarry or sell. He certainly did not think you would dig in your heels like a mule and throw good money after bad. Then he did not know me as well as he thought. Clearly not. Vernon leaned against the counter. I am trying to help you, Rose. I am family. I am trying to save you from making a terrible mistake. I do not need saving. Yes, you do. And when you fail at the fair, when you make a fool of yourself in front of the whole county, you will come to me and beg me to buy this place. And I will, Rose, but the price will be lower, much lower. Rose felt rage rise in her throat, hot and sharp. Get out of my house. Rose, get out, now. Vernon stared at her, then straightened. You will regret this. The only thing I regret is wasting time talking to you. Leave. He left, slamming the door behind him. Rose stood in the kitchen, shaking with anger until she heard Fletcher's horse in the yard. She went to the door and found him dismounting, concern on his face. Saw Vernon riding off. Is everything all right? He threatened me. Said when I fail at the fair he will buy the farm for even less. Fletcher's expression went cold. He will not get the chance. We are going to win. Rose wanted to believe him. But as August wore on and the day of the fair approached, her doubts grew. She had never competed in a pulling contest. She did not know the rules, the expectations, the strategies. What if Vernon was right? What if she humiliated herself in front of the entire county? Fletcher seemed to sense her anxiety. One evening, a week before the fair, he found her sitting on the porch in the twilight, staring at nothing. You are worrying, he said. Of course I am worrying. He sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. Tell me what you are afraid of. Rose took a breath. Failing, losing the farm, proving Vernon right. You will not fail. You cannot know that. I know the team. I know what they can do. Atlas and Goliath are as strong as any team in the county and better trained than most. They will pull their hearts out for you, Rose. I promise you that. But what if something goes wrong? What if I give the wrong command, or the weight is too much, or Fletcher took her hand? The touch was gentle, tentative, and it silenced her immediately. Then we try again, and if we do not win, we find another way, but I will not let you lose this place, Rose. I swear to you. She looked down at their joined hands, his calloused and scarred from years of work, her smaller and paler. You have already given up so much for me, your horses, your time. I told you it is not for nothing. He hesitated, then said, after the fair, when the dust settles, I want to ask you something, properly, but I need your permission first. Rose's heart was hammering again. What do you want to ask? Permission to court you, to call on you in your parlor with your mother-in-law as chaperone if that is proper, to see if what I feel and what I hope you might feel could become something real. Rose turned to face him fully. In the fading light his eyes were dark and serious, and she saw the vulnerability there, the fear of rejection. Yes, she said softly. Yes, Fletcher, you have my permission. After the fair you may call on me properly. His smile was small but radiant. Thank you. They sat together on the porch until the stars came out, hands still linked, and talked quietly about everything and nothing. Rose told him about growing up in a small town in Idaho, about her parents who had passed years ago, about meeting Thomas at a dance and marrying him within 6 months. Fletcher told her about his childhood on a ranch in eastern Oregon, about learning horses from his father, about the quiet satisfaction of gentling a wild animal into a willing partner. I am not good with people, he admitted. Never have been. I say the wrong things, or I say nothing at all. But with you, Rose, it feels easier, like I can breathe. Rose squeezed his hand. You are better with people than you think. Only with you. The night was warm and clear, filled with the sound of crickets and the distant yip of coyotes. Rose felt something settle in her chest, a peace she had not known in months. Whatever happened at the fair, she realized she would not be alone. Fletcher was beside her, and that was enough. The morning of the county fair dawned hot and cloudless. Rose woke before sunrise, her stomach tight with nerves. She dressed carefully in her best calico dress, pinned her hair up, and went to the barn to check on the team. Fletcher was already there, brushing Atlas and Goliath until their coats gleamed. They look wonderful, Rose said. "They are ready." Fletcher set down the brush and turned to her. "Are you?" "I have to be." They loaded the team into the wagon and drove the 15 miles to the fairgrounds in Pendleton. The journey took most of the morning, and by the time they arrived the fair was in full swing. Crowds thronged the midway, children shrieked on carnival rides, and the smell of fried food hung thick in the air. Rose's nerves ratcheted higher with every step. The pulling contest was scheduled for 2 in the afternoon, in a large open field near the livestock barns. A crowd had already gathered, farmers and townsfolk eager to see the competition. Rose spotted Vernon in the crowd, arms crossed, watching her with a smug expression. She looked away. Fletcher led the team to the contestant area, where a dozen other teams were waiting. Rose saw matched Belgians, massive Clydesdales, even a pair of oxen. The competition was fierce. Her confidence wavered. "Do not look at them," Fletcher said quietly. "Just focus on Atlas and Goliath. They know what to do." The contest began promptly at 2. The rules were simple. Each team would pull a stone boat, a heavy wooden sled loaded with weights. The team that pulled the heaviest load the farthest distance won. Teams competed in order of registration, and Rose had drawn the 9th slot out of 12. She watched the first 8 teams with growing apprehension. The loads were enormous, thousands of pounds of stone and iron. Some teams pulled magnificently, dragging the sled dozens of yards. Others balked or strained and failed to move the weight at all. The crowd cheered and groaned with each attempt. Then it was Rose's turn. Fletcher helped her hitch Atlas and Goliath to the stone boat. The horses stood calm, ears forward, waiting for her command. Rose took her place at their heads, throat dry, hands shaking. The judge called the weight, 3,000 pounds, the crowd murmured. It was a heavy load, heavier than most teams had attempted. Rose looked at Fletcher. He nodded once, his eyes steady. She turned to the team. "All right, boys, let us show them what you can do." She clicked her tongue and gave the command. "Pull!" Atlas and Goliath leaned into their harness, muscles bunched under their glossy coats. For a heartbeat nothing happened. Then the stone boat moved. Inch by inch, foot by foot, the massive sled scraped across the dirt. The horses pulled steadily, heads down, legs driving. Rose walked beside them, murmuring encouragement, her heart in her throat. 15 yards, 20, 25. The crowd began to cheer. 30 yards, 35. The horses were straining now, sweat darkening their necks, but they did not falter. 40 yards. The judge blew the whistle. The pull was complete. Rose stopped the team and threw her arms around Atlas's neck, laughing and crying at the same time. The crowd roared. Fletcher was grinning, wider than she had ever seen. 3 more teams pulled after Rose, but none matched the distance. When the final team finished, the judge announced the winner. Rose Norwood with a pull of 40 yards at 3,000 pounds. The crowd erupted. Rose stood frozen, unable to believe it. Fletcher strode over and picked her up, spinning her once before setting her down, both of them laughing like children. The fair organizer, a portly man in a seersucker suit, approached with a blue ribbon in his hand. "Congratulations, Mrs. Norwood. Finest pull I have seen in years." He pinned the ribbon to her dress just above her heart. Rose touched it with trembling fingers. Then Fletcher stepped forward. "May I?" she nodded, not understanding. Gently, carefully, he unpinned the ribbon from her dress and held it up. "This is not for you, Rose. This is for them." He walked to Atlas and Goliath and pinned the ribbon to Atlas's bridle. They earned it. Rose's vision blurred with tears. The gesture was so perfectly Fletcher, honoring the horses who had worked so hard, and she loved him for it. The crowd dispersed slowly, people stopping to congratulate Rose and admire the team. Vernon was nowhere to be seen. Rose caught a glimpse of him leaving the fairgrounds alone, his face dark with anger, and felt a fierce satisfaction. Fletcher helped her load the team back into the wagon. As they prepared to leave, the fair organizer approached again. "Mrs. Norwood, I represent the grain and freight warehouse. Your prize, in addition to the ribbon, is a 6-month contract for hauling and plowing services. If you will come to the courthouse Monday morning, we will finalize the paperwork." "I will be there," Rose said. "Thank you." The ride home was jubilant. Rose could not stop smiling, and Fletcher, usually so reserved, talked more than she had ever heard. They discussed plans for the farm, the work the contract would bring, the money it would provide. By the time they reached Rose's property, the sun was setting in streaks of orange and gold. Fletcher unhitched the team and settled them in the barn with extra grain. Rose watched from the doorway, the blue ribbon still pinned to Atlas's bridle, gleaming in the lamplight. "We did it," she said wonderingly. "You did it." "No, we did it. I could never have managed without you." She took a breath. "Fletcher, I meant what I said about courting. I want you to call on me properly." He turned, hay fork in hand, and smiled. "When?" "Now, tonight." "Tonight?" He looked down at himself, dusty and disheveled from the day. "I am a mess. I do not care. Come inside." Thomas's mother, an elderly woman named Margaret who lived in a small cottage on the property, served as chaperone. She had known about Fletcher's morning visits, had watched the courtship develop with silent approval, and she welcomed him into the parlor with a knowing smile. Rose and Fletcher sat on opposite ends of the small sofa, Margaret in a chair nearby with her knitting. The formality of it was almost absurd after all the time they had spent alone together, but Rose appreciated the propriety. This was important. This was the beginning of something real. They talked for hours, about the farm, about the future, about dreams and fears. Margaret eventually dozed off in her chair, her knitting falling idle, and still they talked. Fletcher told Rose about his hope to build a bigger stable, to raise and train horses on a larger scale. Rose told him about her desire to expand the wheat operation to make the farm truly thrive. "I want to do it together," Fletcher said quietly. "If you will have me." Rose's breath caught. "Are you asking what I think you are asking?" "Not yet. Not properly. You are still in mourning, and I want to do this right. But I am telling you my intentions, Rose. When enough time has passed, when it is proper, I am going to ask you to marry me. And I hope, with everything I have, that you will say yes." Rose reached across the sofa and took his hand. "I will say yes, Fletcher. When the time comes, I will say yes." They sat in the quiet parlor, hands linked, while Margaret snored softly and the night deepened outside. It was the most honest, most hopeful Rose had felt since Thomas died, and she let herself imagine a future with this quiet, steadfast man who had given so much to help her keep what was hers. Monday morning, Rose went to the courthouse and signed the freighting contract in her own name. The clerk, a thin man with spectacles, looked mildly surprised that a woman was claiming the prize, but he processed the paperwork without comment. The contract guaranteed Rose steady work and good wages for 6 months, enough to see her through the winter and into spring. Vernon appeared at her farm that afternoon. Rose saw him ride up and met him on the porch, arms crossed. "I heard you won," he said flatly. "I did." "And you signed the contract." "I did." Vernon dismounted and tied his horse. "Rose, I want to make you another offer." "No." "You have not heard it yet." "I do not need to. I am not selling, Vernon. Not now, not ever. This farm is mine, and I am keeping it." Vernon's jaw tightened. "You are making a mistake. That is my business, not yours. Thomas would not have wanted this. He would not have wanted you struggling alone." Rose felt a flash of anger. "Do not presume to tell me what Thomas would have wanted. He left this place to me because he trusted me to care for it, and that is exactly what I am doing, with help from that horsebreaker." Vernon's lip curled. "Is that what this is about? You have taken up with Fletcher Xander. My personal life is none of your concern. It is when you are disgracing my brother's memory." Rose stepped down from the porch, fury making her reckless. "I love Thomas. I mourned him properly, and I will honor his memory for the rest of my life. But I am not going to spend that life alone and miserable just to satisfy your idea of propriety. Now leave my property, Vernon, and do not come back." Vernon stared at her, his face mottled with rage. For a moment she thought he might argue further. Then he turned, mounted his horse, and rode off without another word. Rose watched him go, her hands shaking. When he was out of sight, she sank down on the porch steps, suddenly exhausted. It was over. The battle with Vernon, the fight to keep the farm, the constant pressure and doubt. It was finally over. She heard hoofbeats and looked up to see Fletcher riding into the yard. He dismounted and sat beside her on the steps. "Saw Vernon leaving," he said. "Everything all right?" "Yes." "I told him to leave and not come back." "Good." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Fletcher said, "I have been thinking." "About what?" "About us. About timing." He turned to face her. "How long do you think is proper to wait before I ask you to marry me?" Rose considered. "Thomas has been dead nearly 6 months. I think another 6 months would be appropriate. January, perhaps." "January." Fletcher nodded slowly. "I can wait until January. You are very patient." "I have waited 3 years already. 6 more months is nothing." Rose smiled and leaned against his shoulder. They sat together on the porch, watching the sun sink toward the horizon, and made quiet plans for the future. The months that followed were busy and productive. Rose used the freighting contract to haul grain for the warehouse, and Fletcher helped her manage the heavy loads. The Perchuran team, Atlas and Goliath, proved their worth again and again, pulling wagon loads that other teams could not match. Word spread, and soon Rose had additional work from neighboring farms, hauling everything from wheat to timber. Fletcher continued coming to the farm daily, though now he stayed longer, helping with whatever work needed doing. He repaired the barn roof, mended fences, and began building a new stable for the horses. Margaret, Thomas's mother, watched the courtship with approval and often invited Fletcher to stay for supper. The 3 of them became a small, comfortable family. In October, Rose began packing away the last of Thomas's belongings. It was a bittersweet task, folding his clothes and storing his personal effects, but it felt necessary. She was not erasing his memory, but she was making room for the future. Fletcher helped, quiet and respectful, and when Rose found herself crying over a favorite book of Thomas's, he simply held her until the tears passed. By November, the farm was more prosperous than it had been in years. Rose had money in the bank, the wheat safely stored, and plans for expanding the acreage in spring. Fletcher's new stable was nearly complete, and he had begun acquiring young horses to train. The future they had imagined was taking shape. December brought the first snow. Rose and Fletcher spent long evenings in the parlor, talking and reading while Margaret knitted by the fire. Sometimes they sat in comfortable silence, simply enjoying each other's presence. The easy companionship they had developed deepened into something profound, a love built on mutual respect and shared work. On Christmas Eve, Fletcher gave Rose a small box wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a delicate silver locket. "It was my mother's," he said. "I want you to have it." Rose opened the locket and found a tiny photograph inside, a young couple in wedding clothes. "Your parents?" "Yes, married 40 years before my father passed. I always wanted what they had, that kind of partnership." Rose closed the locket and fastened it around her neck. "Thank you, Fletcher. I will treasure it. He smiled, and she saw the promise in his eyes. Soon, very soon, January arrived cold and clear. On the morning of the 15th, Fletcher rode to Rose's farm before dawn. She met him at the door, already dressed. "I know it is early," he said, "but I could not wait any longer. Rose Norwood, will you marry me?" Rose laughed, tears springing to her eyes. "Yes, yes, of course I will." Fletcher pulled a simple gold band from his pocket and slipped it onto her finger. It fit perfectly. He had ordered it months ago, she realized, planning for this moment. They were married on a frozen January morning 2 weeks later, in the small church in Pendleton where Rose had attended with Thomas. Margaret stood as witness, along with Fletcher's older brother who traveled from eastern Oregon. The ceremony was brief and simple, the church cold despite the fire in the stove. But when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Rose felt a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the temperature. Outside the church, Atlas and Goliath stood in harness, hitched to a wagon decorated with pine boughs and white ribbons. Fletcher lifted Rose into the seat, then climbed up beside her. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Home," he said simply. They drove back to the farm through the snowy landscape, the Perchurin team pulling steadily. When they arrived, Margaret had a wedding supper waiting, simple but delicious. They ate together, the three of them, and talked about plans for spring planting and foaling season. It was not a grand celebration, but it was perfect. That night, alone in the house for the first time as husband and wife, Fletcher took Rose's hands. "I want you to know," he said seriously, "that I will never try to take this place from you. The farm is yours. Your name stays on the deed." "I am just here to help." Rose shook her head. "No, Fletcher, it is ours now. We are partners, in everything." He smiled and kissed her gently. Partners. The winter passed quietly. Rose and Fletcher settled into married life with an ease that surprised them both. They worked the farm together, Fletcher's skill with animals complementing Rose's knowledge of wheat farming. In the evenings they planned for the future, discussing which fields to plant, which horses to breed, how to expand the operation. Spring came early, and with it new life. Rose discovered she was pregnant in March, and Fletcher reacted with a joy so profound he could barely speak. He hovered over her anxiously, trying to prevent her from doing heavy work, until she laughingly told him she was not made of glass. The farm thrived. With 2 pairs of hands and Fletcher's expertise, they planted more wheat than ever before. The Perchurin team had proven so successful that Fletcher acquired 2 more Perchurins, building a breeding program alongside his saddle horse training. By summer, the operation was the most successful in the county. Vernon Norwood appeared once more in June, apparently unaware of Rose's marriage. He found her in the garden, Fletcher working in the nearby field. "Rose, I have come to make one final offer," Vernon began. Rose straightened from her weeding, one hand resting on her rounded belly. "I am married now, Vernon. My name is Rose Xander, and this farm belongs to my husband and me. There will be no offers, now or ever." Vernon stared at her stomach, then at Fletcher approaching from the field. His face went rigid with anger. "You have made your choice," he said coldly. "Do not expect any help from me when things go badly." "We never expected help from you," Fletcher said, arriving at Rose's side. "And things are going very well. Now leave." Vernon left without another word, and they never saw him again. In late September, Rose gave birth to a healthy baby girl. They named her Grace, and she had Rose's fair hair and Fletcher's dark eyes. Fletcher held his daughter with a reverence that made Rose weep, his big calloused hands cradling the tiny infant with infinite gentleness. "She is perfect," he whispered. "She is ours," Rose said, smiling through her tears. The years that followed were full and happy. The farm prospered beyond anything Rose had imagined. Fletcher's horse operation grew, and he became known throughout Oregon as the finest trainer of working horses in the region. Rose managed the wheat farming with skill and intelligence, expanding the acreage and experimenting with new varieties. Grace grew into a lively, bright child, and 3 years after her birth, Rose gave birth to a son they named Oliver. He was sturdy and curious, with Fletcher's quiet intensity and Rose's determination. The children grew up on the farm, learning to work alongside their parents, to respect the land and the animals. Margaret lived to see her great-grandchildren, and she passed peacefully in her sleep when Grace was 5 and Oliver was 2. They buried her in the cemetery beside Thomas, and Rose planted roses on the grave every spring. Fletcher never forgot that Rose's success had begun with his willingness to sacrifice his own horses for her dream. Every year on the anniversary of the county fair, he would pin a blue ribbon to Atlas's bridle, honoring the team that had started everything. Even after Atlas and Goliath grew old and retired from pulling, Fletcher kept them on the farm, giving them an easy life in the pasture as thanks for their service. Years passed in the rhythm of planting and harvest, foaling and training, children growing and learning. Rose and Fletcher worked side by side, partners in every sense, building a life that was richer and fuller than either had dreamed possible. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Fletcher took Rose back to the county fair. They walked the midway together, watching younger farmers compete in the pulling contest, and reminisced about that hot August day when everything had changed. "You ever regret it?" Rose asked. "Selling your horses for me?" Fletcher pulled her close. "Not for 1 second. Those horses brought me a farm, a family, and the love of my life. I would make that trade 1,000 times over." Rose leaned her head against his shoulder, watching Grace and Oliver run ahead to the carnival games, and felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. This was the life she had fought for, the life Fletcher had helped her build. It was not the life she had planned when she married Thomas all those years ago, but it was good and true and entirely her own. That evening, as they drove home with the children asleep in the back of the wagon, Rose looked over at Fletcher holding the reins. The blue ribbon from their original win, faded but still intact, was pinned to his vest pocket. He caught her looking and smiled. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That I am grateful for everything, for you." He reached over and took her hand. "I am the grateful one, Rose. You gave me a purpose, a home, a reason to be more than I was. You gave me everything." They rode the rest of the way in comfortable silence, the horses pulling steady, the stars bright overhead. Behind them, the fairgrounds lights faded into the distance, but ahead the farmhouse glowed warm and welcoming, a beacon calling them home. The farm continued to grow over the years. By the time Grace and Oliver were teenagers, the Xander place was one of the largest and most prosperous operations in Umatilla County. Grace showed her mother's head for business and her father's way with horses, and she began training alongside Fletcher when she was 12. Oliver loved the wheat farming, studying crop rotation and soil management with an intensity that made Rose proud. When Grace turned 18, a young farmer from Walla Walla began calling on her. Fletcher interrogated the young man thoroughly, but Rose could see he approved. The boy was hardworking and respectful, with his own small farm and big ambitions. A year later, Grace married him in the same church where Rose and Fletcher had wed, and Fletcher walked her down the aisle with tears in his eyes. Oliver took over more of the farming operation as he grew older, implementing new techniques and expanding the acreage. When he was 20, he met a schoolteacher from Pendleton, a bright and capable young woman who shared his love of the land. They married the following spring, and Fletcher built them a small house on the far edge of the property. Rose and Fletcher grew older together, their hair graying, their hands more gnarled from years of work, but their love never dimmed. They still walked the fields together in the evenings, still sat on the porch watching the sunset, still held hands when they thought no one was looking on their 25th wedding anniversary. Their children and grandchildren gathered at the farm for a celebration. The house was full of noise and laughter, children running through the rooms, the smell of cooking filling the air. Rose stood in the kitchen, surveying the chaos with deep satisfaction. Fletcher came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. "Happy anniversary, Mrs. Xander." Rose turned in his embrace. "Happy anniversary. Can you believe it has been 25 years? Best 25 years of my life. Even the hard parts, especially the hard parts, they made the good parts sweeter." Rose kissed him, and somewhere in the house one of the grandchildren squealed with laughter. "We did well, did we not?" Rose said softly. Fletcher looked around at the house full of family, at the farm thriving beyond the windows, at the life they had built from grief and determination and love. "We did better than well," he said. "We did extraordinary." That evening, after the guests had gone and the house was quiet, Rose and Fletcher walked out to the barn one last time. Atlas had passed years ago, but Goliath was still alive, ancient and gentle, spending his days in the sun. They visited him in his stall, and Rose produced the faded blue ribbon from the county fair, carefully preserved all these years. "You remember?" she asked, holding it up. "Every detail," Fletcher said. "It was the day everything changed." Rose pinned the ribbon to the old horse's halter. Goliath snuffled at it curiously, then went back to his hay. "Thank you, old friend," Rose whispered, stroking the Percheron's nose. "You gave us everything." They walked back to the house hand in hand, two people who had found each other in grief and built a love that would last beyond lifetimes. The farm stretched out around them in the gathering darkness, fields and barns and fences, all of it a testament to what could be built when two people worked together with love and determination. Inside, they climbed the stairs to the bedroom they had shared for 25 years. Rose changed into her nightgown and brushed out her hair, now more silver than gold. Fletcher sat on the edge of the bed, watching her with the same quiet intensity he had shown the first time he brought the borrowed harness to her gate. "What are you thinking?" Rose asked, catching his eye in the mirror. "That I would do it all again. Every bit of it. The hard mornings training the team, selling my horses, fighting Vernon, all of it, just to end up here with you." Rose set down the brush and went to him. She cupped his face in her hands, memorizing the lines and weathering that told the story of their years together. "I love you, Fletcher Xander, more than I ever thought possible. I love you, Rose, always have, always will." They settled into bed together, Rose tucked against Fletcher's side the way they had slept every night of their marriage. Outside, the wind whispered through the wheat fields, and somewhere in the distance a coyote called. The house was quiet, the farm at peace, and two people who had found each other against all odds drifted into sleep together, grateful for the past and content with the life they had made. Years continued to pass. Rose and Fletcher grew very old, but they remained active on the farm, working alongside their children and grandchildren until their bodies simply would not allow it anymore. Even then, they sat on the porch every morning, drinking coffee and watching the sun rise over the wheat fields, offering advice and stories to anyone who would listen. Fletcher passed first, on a mild spring morning in his 83rd year. He died in his sleep, peacefully, with Rose holding his hand. The funeral was the largest Pendleton had seen in decades, attended by hundreds of people whose lives had been touched by the quiet horse breaker, who had become a legend in the region. Rose mourned him deeply, but without the desperation she had felt when Thomas died. This grief was different, tempered by gratitude for the decades they had shared, the life they had built, the love that had sustained them both. She knew, with absolute certainty, that they had made the most of every moment given to them. She lived another 5 years, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, all of them benefiting from the foundation she and Fletcher had laid. When she passed on a quiet winter evening, her last thoughts were of a hot August day at the county fair, of a blue ribbon pinned to a Percheron's bridle, of a man with work-roughened hands and eyes full of love telling her he would sell everything he owned just to help her keep what was hers. They buried her beside Fletcher in the cemetery, and the entire county came to pay respects to the woman who had defied expectations, fought for her land, and built a legacy of love and hard work that would endure for generations. On her headstone, beneath her name and dates, their children had inscribed a simple phrase, partner, mother, beloved, and on Fletcher's headstone mirroring hers, partner, father, beloved. The farm continued, passed down through the family, each generation honoring the work and sacrifice of those who had come before. The story of Rose and Fletcher became family legend, told and retold to children who grew up walking the same fields, working the same land, living under the same wide Oregon sky. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the work was done and the family gathered on the porch, someone would bring out a faded blue ribbon, carefully preserved in a glass frame, and tell the story of the county fair, of the team that pulled 3,000 pounds 40 yards, of the widow who refused to give up her land, and of the horse breaker who loved her enough to sacrifice everything. It was a story of courage and determination, of hard work and harder choices, but most of all it was a love story. A story of two people who found each other when they needed it most, who built a life together from nothing but determination and hope, who proved that sometimes the best things in life come from the hardest struggles. The ribbon still hung in the farmhouse, a reminder of where it all began. And the land still produced, generation after generation, a testament to the legacy of Rose and Fletcher Xander, partners in every sense of the word, who loved deeply and built something that would last long after they were gone. Their story became more than family history. It became part of the fabric of the county itself, a reminder that love and hard work could overcome any obstacle, that courage came in many forms, and that sometimes the greatest victories were not won with violence or cunning, but with patience, determination, and the willingness to sacrifice for someone you loved. And on summer evenings, when the wheat turned gold and the sun hung low on the horizon, you could almost see them there still, walking the fields hand in hand, checking the crops, visiting the horses, living the life they had fought so hard to build. The farm remembered them, the land held their story, and their love lived on in every generation that followed, a beacon of hope and proof that true partnership could weather any storm and build something beautiful that would endure forever.